I woke up that Saturday to the sound of metal clanging. When I stepped onto my porch, there she was, Karen, standing at the bottom of my driveway, planting bright orange cones across my boathouse ramp like she owned the place. A fresh HOA property. No access sign flapped in the breeze, and she was grinning as if she'd just claimed victory in some invisible war. By noon, my ramp was still blocked. By 3 p.m., it was the busiest spot on the lake, just not for her reasons. A line of state police boats idled at my dock, officers unloading gear while Karen stood frozen on the shore, jaw hanging like a dropped gate. She thought she'd locked me out of my own property. Instead, she opened the door to something she couldn't control, and it all happened before dinner. I've lived on Miller's Point for nearly 20 years, bought the place in my mid-30s, when my knees still worked like they were supposed to, and my hair didn't need a cap to keep the sunburn off my scalp. It's not a mansion, just a sturdy cedar-sided home with a tin roof and a wide back porch that looks straight out over the lake. The kind of place that doesn't impress a real estate agent, but makes a man feel like he's arrived. I spent most of my working life elbow deep in boat engines, first at a marina down the highway, later running my own small shop. Fixing things was in my bones. I liked grease under my fingernails and the satisfaction of hearing an old Evinrude purr after hours of tinkering. By the time I sold the business, I'd saved enough to live comfortably, keep the lights on, and spend my mornings fishing instead of fighting traffic. Life here used to be easy. The lake would steam in the early morning, the kind of mist that made you think the world was still waking up. I'd brew a pot of coffee, step out to the boathouse, and watch the sun cut gold streaks through the fog. Maybe take the boat out if the mood struck. Maybe just sit on the dock with a line in the water and the radio low. The ramp was my pride. Poured concrete, sloping gently into the water, just wide enough for my skiff or the occasional neighbor's bass boat. I'd put it in myself, years before the HOA ever set foot in this cove. It meant freedom launching when I wanted, coming home when I pleased. That freedom's exactly what the HOA couldn't stand. Now, I didn't always have an HOA breathing down my neck. When I first moved here, Miller's Point was just a loose collection of homes and cabins, each with its quirks. The old McKinney place had a roofline that sagged like a lazy cat. The Martins painted their shutters bright turquoise every other summer, and nobody said a word. But a few years back, a wave of newcomers rolled in, folks from the city who thought lake life meant curated landscaping and matching mailboxes. They banded together, formed an HOA, and before long, we had rules about everything from fence height to what kind of wreath you could hang in December. Karen showed up around that time, early 60s, but she dressed like she was still running for prom queen, bold prints, big jewelry, and a hairstyle that could survive a hurricane. She moved into the largest house on the North Shore and, within months, had muscled her way into the presidency of the HOA. Her reputation grew faster than a thunderstorm over open water, loud in meetings, sharp with her words, and convinced she was the final authority on anything that touched the lake. We kept things polite at first, a nod at the mailbox, the occasional nice day when passing on the road, but it was a cold politeness, the kind you give a neighbor you don't trust enough to invite over for a beer. Then came her first attempt to rope me into her plans, asking, no, insisting that I host the annual HOA summer mixer at my boathouse. I laughed and told her it wasn't my kind of crowd. She didn't laugh back. From that moment on, I could feel the temperature drop in every interaction. The HOA's rules were always written to sound reasonable, but Karen enforced them like commandments. If your lawn was a half-inch too long, you got a letter. Paint chipping on your railing letter. Wind knocked over your trash bin before pickup. Somehow, still a letter. Most folks just grumbled and paid whatever fine she tacked on, not wanting the hassle. I've never been much for rolling over. My life revolved around the lake, not HOA politics. Evenings on the porch with Hank Williams on the radio. Early Sunday mornings with a thermos of coffee and the slow putter of my boat's engine as I slipped into the coves. Friends dropping by to borrow a wrench or share a cooler of beer. That's the way it was supposed to be. But Karen had a way of infecting even the quiet days. You'd be halfway through a peaceful afternoon and hear the crunch of her SUV tires on your gravel. See her marching up the drive with a clipboard under her arm. She'd point at something, anything, and declare it non-compliant. She liked that word. Still, I figured I could handle her. I'd seen worse in my years: customers who tried to stiff me on a repair, marina managers who thought they could outsmart the tides. Karen was just another nuisance in a long line of them. Or so I thought. The truth is, I underestimated how far she'd go. Looking back, I can see the signs. The way she'd linger by the edge of my property, phone in hand, pretending to take pictures of the lake but angling it toward my ramp. The way she'd bring up safety concerns about private ramps in board meetings, her eyes flicking to me like a spotlight. The casual mentions to other neighbors. Well, some people don't follow the rules, and it makes things unsafe for the rest of us. I brushed it off. I figured, let her talk. Words don't pour concrete, and they sure as hell don't move boats. But Karen wasn't after words. She was after control. And the boathouse ramp, my ramp, was the key to it. That ramp was more than just a slab of concrete. It was where my grandkids learned to skip rocks, where I'd tied off the first boat I ever bought with cash, where I'd sat on hot July nights, feet dangling in the water, listening to the frogs and the hum of the cicadas. It was mine in a way no piece of paper could explain, and it was exactly where she decided to plant her flag. I didn't know it then, but the quiet life I'd built here was about to get a whole lot louder. Let us know where you're watching from today, and if you're new here, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to join our growing community. It was a Thursday morning when the first real shot was fired. The lake was calm, glassy, reflecting a sky so blue it could have been painted. I had just finished my second cup of coffee and was headed down to the boathouse to do a little maintenance, tighten a few cleats, oil the hinges on the dock gate. I could hear the faint slap of water against the pilings and the rustle of the tall grass on the shore. It was my kind of morning, but as I rounded the bend of the driveway, I stopped dead. Bright orange cones stood like sentries across the width of my ramp. Heavy plastic chain ran between them, looped through a shiny padlock on a metal post that hadn't been there the day before. And right at the center, zip-tied to the chain, was a laminated sign that read, "Closed until further notice. HOA safety review in progress." My first reaction wasn't anger, it was confusion. I actually looked around for a moment, half expecting this to be some sort of mistake. Maybe a county project, a water quality inspection. But there was no county truck, no clipboard-toting worker in sight. Just silence, the cones, and that smug little sign. Then I saw her. Karen was standing off to the side, sunglasses perched on her nose, arms folded tight, her lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. "Morning," she called, voice syrupy in that way people use when they're about to ruin your day. "What's all this?" I asked, gesturing to the blockade. "Safety review," she said. "The HOA board has received multiple complaints about the condition of this ramp. Uneven surface, slippery algae buildup, possible environmental runoff. We can't risk anyone getting hurt. That ramp's been here 20 years. I said, "It's solid as the day I poured it." She gave a small shrug, like facts were just a matter of opinion. "We'll see. Until then, no launching from here. HOA regulations." I felt my jaw tighten. HOA doesn't own this ramp. "Karen, I do." She tilted her head, as if I'd just said something quaint. "The HOA governs all shoreline access within Miller's Point. That includes private structures that impact the shared environment. You agreed to that when you bought here, Karen," I said slowly. "There was no HOA when I bought here, and you know it." Her smile widened just a fraction. "Then perhaps you should review the updated covenants. They were mailed out last year. In the meantime," she tapped the chain with one manicured finger, "access is closed." She turned and walked back toward her SUV, the crunch of gravel under her heels carrying a kind of finality I didn't appreciate. I stood there for a while after she left, staring at the cones. My ramp looked naked without a boat in the water, like someone had stolen part of my life and left the outline behind. By lunchtime, I'd called the HOA office, if you can call it that. It's really just a desk in the back of the community center, manned part-time by a woman named Trish, who speaks like she's reading off a script. "I'm sorry, sir," she said, "but the board has authorized a temporary closure pending a safety assessment. It's for your own protection. I didn't request protection, I said, and I didn't authorize you to touch my property. Sir, the board has the authority to— No, they don't. I cut in. Not here. Not on this ramp. She hesitated. If you have concerns, you can bring them up at the next board meeting. When's that? 3 weeks from Tuesday. I laughed into the phone. 3 weeks. And in the meantime, I'm just supposed to twiddle my thumbs while my own ramp is chained up. I'm sorry, sir. That's the process. I hung up before she could repeat herself. By mid-afternoon, word had gotten around the lake. My friend Bill from 2 docks over wandered by, hands stuffed into the pockets of his fishing vest. Karen got you too. Huh, he said. I frowned. What do you mean, too? She's been on a tear lately. Shut down the Johnsons' fire pit last month. Claimed it was a hazard to the community. Told the Lewis family they had to repaint their deck because the color wasn't harmonious. She's been gunning for that ramp of yours for a while. Guess she finally pulled the trigger. I shook my head. All because I wouldn't host her stupid mixer. Bill smirked. You think she needs a reason? Karen's reason is Karen. The sun was starting to dip low when I saw her SUV again, creeping past my driveway like a shark's fin slicing through water. She didn't stop this time, just slowed enough to look. I swear I could feel her eyes scanning for a reaction. She wanted me to be rattled, I'll admit. For the rest of that evening, I sat on my porch, beer in hand, staring at the cones glowing orange in the fading light. My boat sat idle, lines coiled, motor silent. The lake was still, but my mind wasn't. There's a saying in the service, control your anger, or it will control you. I'd lived by that for most of my life, but as the stars came out, I could feel the first spark of something dangerous catching in my gut. She thought she'd made the opening move. She thought she had me cornered with her rules and her laminated signs. What she didn't know, what she couldn't know, was that I'd spent my whole life learning how to work around broken systems and stubborn people. You can chain a ramp, but you can't chain the man who built it. And I was already thinking about my next step. I didn't have to wait long for Karen to up the ante. By the very next week, it was clear she had no intention of letting the safety review fade quietly into the background. If anything, it was her opening act. It started small. That Monday, I got an official-looking envelope in the mail, HOA letterhead, stamped urgent. Inside was a notice of violation, stating that my lawn exceeded the approved height limit. I had mowed it 2 days earlier. You could have rolled a marble across it. I crumpled the letter, tossed it on the kitchen counter, and figured it was just Karen flexing her pen. But by Wednesday, I had 2 more envelopes. One accused me of unauthorized exterior modifications because I'd replaced a dock light bulb with a brighter LED. The other claimed my garbage cans had been visible from the street for more than 12 hours after pickup, a capital offense. Apparently, it was almost funny in its pettiness. Almost. By Friday, the humor had worn thin. I came home from town to find Karen in my driveway, phone in hand, snapping photos of the side of my house. She didn't even pretend to be discreet. What do you think you're doing? I asked, stepping out of my truck. Documenting, she said flatly. For the board. For what? Her eyes swept the length of my house. I see peeling paint on your window trim, a possible gutter obstruction, and she gestured toward the ramp, continued non-compliance with the closure order. It's not your closure order, I said, walking toward her. And you're trespassing. She took a deliberate step back, holding her phone like a shield. I'm well within my rights to inspect for violations. Read your covenants. I took another step forward. Read my deed, she sniffed, tucked her phone into her purse, and walked away without another word. But I knew this wasn't over. It wasn't just me she was after. In the days that followed, I noticed a shift in the neighborhood. People who used to wave when they pass now averted their eyes. Others came by in hushed tones, warning me to be careful because Karen was building a case. One evening, my neighbor Patty knocked on my door with a casserole dish in hand. She leaned in close, eyes darting toward the road. She's telling people you're a troublemaker, said you're trying to undermine the HOA and that you've got connections. Patty gave me a look that said she didn't buy it, but plenty of others might. She's running a smear campaign, I said. Patty nodded. And she's good at it. The weekend brought the next escalation. I was hosting my usual Saturday BBQ, just a few friends, some burgers, a cooler of beer. We'd barely gotten the grill going when a sheriff's cruiser rolled down the drive. "Got a noise complaint," the deputy said, flipping open his notepad. I laughed. "It's 4:30 in the afternoon, just doing my job," he said, glancing toward the lake. "Look, I can see this isn't loud. Just maybe keep it down. You know how it is." I knew exactly how it was. I could see her across the street, peeking from behind her curtain. I kept the BBQ going, but the easy atmosphere was gone. Everyone spoke a little softer. People started leaving earlier than usual. That was her real aim, not to stop the party, but to make it less fun. The next morning, I found another violation notice stuffed under my door: unauthorized gathering exceeding occupancy limits. No signature, but it didn't need one. Karen was pushing, testing, seeing how much irritation I'd swallow before snapping. I tried to keep my cool. For a while, I succeeded. I mowed the lawn twice in a week just to avoid another bogus letter. I kept the garbage cans in the shed until the moment the truck came by. I replaced the LED bulb with the old yellow one just to close that front. But I wasn't playing defense because I was beaten. I was playing defense because I knew the longer I let her think she was winning, the more careless she'd get. And careless she did get. One afternoon, I saw her parked at the far end of the cove, talking to two men in khakis who looked like they'd been plucked straight from a real estate brochure. They kept pointing toward my ramp, jotting notes on clipboards. I wandered down the shoreline, keeping my distance, just far enough to catch bits of conversation carried by the breeze. Could be converted. Shared launch for community, one of the men was saying. Karen nodded eagerly. Exclusive access for HOA members. Increase property values. That's when it hit me. She wasn't just blocking my ramp to be petty. She was trying to absorb it, fold it into the HOA's control, maybe even use it as a selling point for the newer homes they were pushing up the road. It wasn't about algae or safety or harmonious aesthetics. It was about taking something that was mine and turning it into something she could claim credit for. That night, I sat on my porch long after the sun went down, listening to the quiet lap of water against the dock pilings. The cones still stood, glowing faintly in the moonlight, but instead of making me angry, they made me smile, because now I understood the game. And once you understand the game, you can start planning how to win it. Karen wanted my ramp. She was going to regret ever stepping foot on it. The breakthrough didn't come from some dramatic confrontation. It came from a cardboard box in my attic. After a week of dealing with Karen's games, I decided it was time to stop reacting and start digging. My property files had been sitting in that attic since I bought the place, collecting dust alongside old fishing tackle and a box of Marine Corps keepsakes. I dragged it down, flipped it open, and started sifting through 2 decades worth of yellowing papers. At first, it was the usual closing documents, tax receipts, inspection reports. But then I found a manila folder marked Dock and Ramp Permits. Inside were the original county approvals, stamped and signed in 2003, authorizing construction of the Boathouse ramp. The language was crystal clear: private use permitted without restriction, structure exempt from subsequent shoreline regulatory changes. I sat back in my chair and grinned. That one sentence meant the HOA couldn't touch it, not legally, not without running headlong into county property law. But there was more. Tucked behind the permit was a photocopy of an old state statute I'd forgotten about. Back when I was building the ramp, I'd asked the county clerk about any special considerations for law enforcement or emergency services. She'd given me this statute something about emergency operational access to private marine structures with owner consent. Basically, it said if I gave permission, state agencies like the Marine Division of the State Police could use my ramp whenever they needed. And while the HOA could hassle me all they wanted, they couldn't interfere with state operations without crossing a legal line so bright it might as well be painted neon. That was the seed of an idea. But before I could plant it, I wanted to be absolutely sure about the HOA's actual jurisdiction. I spent the next 2 evenings buried in a stack of HOA bylaws and covenants that Karen had mailed out last year. They were as dry as a saltine, But buried in the legalese was something important. HOA authority over private structures only applied if they were constructed after the adoption of the HOA charter. My ramp predated the HOA by a good 7 years, which meant all her safety review nonsense was nothing more than smoke and mirrors. I almost laughed out loud reading it. Karen had been stomping around like a queen declaring borders, and the whole time she'd been building her castle on sand. Still, I knew that just waving a permit in her face wouldn't cut it. People like Karen don't retreat when you prove them wrong. They just double down, change the rules, or find a new angle of attack. If I wanted this to stick, I needed something that didn't just win the fight, but ended the war. That's when I remembered an incident from a few summers back. The state police had run a boating safety sweep on the lake, setting up inspection points to check registration, safety gear, and sobriety. The only problem was their launch point had been miles away, costing them precious time. One of the officers had joked over a beer at the marina. "Man, if we could have launched from your place, we'd have saved half a day." It had been a throwaway comment at the time. Now, it felt like a loaded round sitting in the chamber. If the state police were officially using my ramp, it wouldn't matter how many cones Karen dragged over or how many laminated signs she zip-tied. She wouldn't be able to get within 20 feet without a badge telling her to step aside. And the best part, it would be perfectly legal, sanctioned by the state, and backed by my original property rights. I decided to test the waters before making any calls. The next afternoon, I wandered into the local bait and tackle shop, where I knew Sergeant Harper from the Marine Division often stopped in. Sure enough, he was at the counter, chatting with the owner about an upcoming patrol. Still launching from McCulloch's Landing, I asked casually. He groaned. "Yeah, and burning 2 hours just to get to the North Shore. It's a mess." I let a slow smile spread across my face. What if I told you I had a private ramp on the North Shore? Concrete, deep water access, plenty of space for staging, all yours for the day if you want it. His eyebrows shot up. "You serious? Dead serious? You'd just need to file the operational notice with the county. My ramp's grandfathered in HOA, can't touch it." Harper leaned in a little. "You having trouble with them?" I shrugged. "Let's just say they've been overstepping." He chuckled. "Well, I'd be happy to kill 2 birds with 1 stone. We've got a patrol scheduled for Saturday. I'll talk to the captain, see if we can make it happen." By the time I got home, my plan was no longer hypothetical. It was in motion. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, permits spread out in front of me, and wrote up a simple agreement granting the state police full use of my ramp for the patrol day. I printed it in duplicate, left one for my records, and handed the other to Harper the next morning. All I had to do now was wait. I didn't tell a soul, not Bill, not Patty, not anyone. The fewer people who knew, the less chance word would reach Karen. I wanted her to be blindsided, standing there with her cones and her laminated sign when the cavalry rolled in. And something told me, when that moment came, it wouldn't just end the ramp dispute. It would change the way Karen looked at me entirely. In fact, I suspected it might change the way the whole neighborhood looked at her. Karen must have had some sixth sense for when she wasn't the only one moving pieces on the board. It was Thursday morning when I noticed her SUV idling at the far end of my driveway, engine running, windows tinted dark. I was halfway through changing the oil on my skiff when the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I wiped my hands on a rag and stepped into view. The moment she saw me, the SUV rolled away at a crawl, like a cat pretending it wasn't caught in the bird bath. That afternoon, a letter arrived, certified mail this time. The HOA formally demanded I present myself for an immediate property inspection, citing multiple unresolved violations and failure to comply with safety directives. The language was heavier than usual, full of phrases like escalating enforcement measures and potential legal remedies. I knew exactly what it was, a fishing expedition. She wanted to get onto my property, snoop around, and maybe find something, anything. She could blow up into a bigger problem before whatever she suspected came to pass. I didn't bite. I wrote a short reply, reminding the board that my ramp was grandfathered in, that the HOA had no authority to conduct inspections without my consent, and that trespass laws still existed in this county. The next day, I caught her again, this time on foot, taking pictures from the edge of my lot. She had one of those big zoom lenses like she was auditioning for Wildlife Photographer of the Year. I walked over, staying just inside my property line. "Looking for birds?" I asked. She lowered the camera slightly. "Just documenting conditions." "Careful," I said. "With a lens that size, people might think you're spying." Her smile was tight. "You seem nervous." "Jack." "Planning something," I grinned. "Always." That got me a squint before she turned and strode off toward the road. By Saturday morning, she had turned the dial to 11. I woke to the sound of voices outside, two men in khaki slacks, clipboards in hand, standing at the foot of my driveway with Karen between them. They introduced themselves as compliance consultants hired by the HOA to evaluate community assets for safety and uniformity. I told them the only asset they could evaluate was the speed at which they could walk off my property. They left, but not before Karen made a big show of snapping more photos. The pressure wasn't just on me anymore. Patty told me Karen had been knocking on doors, warning neighbors that I was a liability to the community. Bill said she'd cornered him at the bait shop, suggesting that my inflexibility was going to drive down property values. She was trying to isolate me, to make the showdown, whatever she thought it would be, look like the neighborhood against me, not just Karen against me. But here's the thing. The more she pushed, the more she revealed. She didn't know the specifics of what I was planning, but she knew enough to be afraid of it, and fear makes people sloppy. That sloppiness showed up late Sunday night. I was out on the porch, enjoying a quiet beer, when I saw a flashlight bobbing near the ramp. I grabbed mine and walked down. Karen was there, standing over the chain she'd strung across the ramp, fiddling with the padlock. "Evening," I said. She jumped like I'd fired a starter pistol. "Oh, I was just checking the security of the closure. Middle of the night's a strange time for that," I said. She recovered quickly, putting on that HOA president poise. "I have a responsibility to ensure compliance. And frankly, Jack, I think it's time you stopped resisting. This ramp is going to become a shared community resource, whether you like it or not. You can either work with us, or you can watch it happen without you." I stepped closer, lowering my voice. "Karen, I've been watching you make moves for weeks now." "But you've been looking at the wrong piece of paper." Her eyes narrowed. "What's that supposed to mean?" "You'll find out soon enough," I said, then turned and walked back toward the house. I could feel her eyes burning holes in my back. The next morning, Monday, was quiet. Too quiet. No SUVs idling, no new letters, no strangers with clipboards. She was waiting now, coiled like a spring. Good. I wanted her front and center when the curtain lifted. That evening, I got the call from Sergeant Harper. The patrol was a go. They'd be at my ramp by 9 a.m. Saturday with 2 boats, a truckload of equipment, and half a dozen officers. He'd filed the operational notice with the county that morning. "Once we're there," he said, "nobody's getting in our way without committing a criminal offense." "That clear enough, Crystal?" I said. All week, I went about my routine like nothing was different: fishing at dawn, fixing the outboard, mowing the lawn. Karen kept her distance, but I could sense her circling, waiting for an opening. She thought Saturday was going to be another small victory. Another morning of her cones and chains and smug little speeches. She had no idea it was going to be the day she lost the war. By Tuesday morning, I had shifted from patient defense to full-on preparation. If Saturday was going to end this once and for all, I wasn't going to leave a single detail to chance. First order of business was paperwork. I made 3 certified copies of my original county permits, the statute about state agency use, and the signed agreement with the state police. One set went into a waterproof folder in my boathouse. Another set went into a locked file cabinet in the house. The third, I slipped into a plain manila envelope and tucked under the seat of my truck. If Karen somehow tried to play games with missing documents, I'd still have the receipts literally. Next was the ramp itself. I spent Wednesday morning pressure washing it until it gleamed. The algae Karen claimed was a hazard vanishing in green streaks into the lake. I tightened the cleats, replaced 2 weathered planks on the dock walkway, and made sure the staging area had plenty of room for vehicles to turn around. If I was going to host a state patrol operation, it was going to look professional. Harper had warned me Karen's going to hit the roof when she sees us. Expect her to try and stall, argue, or outright block us before we get set up. That was fine by me. In fact, I was counting on it. Thursday evening, I stopped by the marina to pick up a few extra dock bumpers and chat with some of the old-timers. Word travels fast on this lake, and I knew if I dropped a vague hint about Saturday being a busy morning at my place, it would reach the right ears. The more people who showed up to watch, the better. Nothing takes the wind out of a petty tyrant's sails faster than having an audience for their humiliation. Friday morning, I walked the property one last time. The cones were still across the ramp, her last act of defiance before the big day. I didn't touch them. I wanted them there when the state police arrived. I wanted her to be the one to try and defend them in front of men and women wearing badges. That afternoon, I called Bill. "Bring your camera tomorrow." I told him, "You're going to want to get this on video." He chuckled. "You finally pulling the trigger." "Oh," I said, "I'm firing a whole magazine." That night, I didn't sleep much. I sat on the porch in the dark, nursing a beer and listening to the crickets, running the morning through my head like a mission brief. Boat ramp clear at 0830. State police convoy in position at 0900. Karen arrives somewhere between 0850 and 0905, depending on whether she's been tipped off. Argument begins within 30 seconds of first vehicle pulling in. By 0915, cones gone, ramp open, operation underway. But the most important part, staying calm. I wasn't going to get into a shouting match. I wasn't going to gloat or throw my weight around. I'd let the paperwork and the uniform speak for me. The quieter I stayed, the louder her meltdown would sound. At 6:30 a.m., Saturday, I was up in dress jeans, boots, flannel shirt, the kind of outfit that said, "I'm just a guy on my own property." Not, "I've been plotting this for weeks." I made a big thermos of coffee, grabbed a folding chair, and set it up on the porch with a perfect view of the driveway and ramp. By 8:15, the lake was already stirring fishermen heading out, kids laughing on paddleboards, the occasional whine of a jet ski in the distance. Across the cove, I caught a glimpse of Karen's curtains twitching. She was up, watching, maybe sensing something off. At 8:50, a gray SUV pulled slowly into view hers. She parked halfway down the drive and stepped out, clipboard in hand, lips already pursed into that self-satisfied smile I'd come to know so well. She strode toward the ramp like she was about to cut the ribbon on a new development. "Good morning, Jack," she called, her voice carrying that fake warmth like perfume sprayed over mildew. "Just here to ensure the closure remains intact. We've had reports of unusual activity." I sipped my coffee. "You don't say." She gestured toward the cones. "All secure, I see." "That's good. Wouldn't want any unauthorized use." I checked my watch. 8:59. Then I heard the low rumble of diesel engines. Karen's brow furrowed. She turned toward the sound as the first truck came into view, a dark blue state police pickup. Trailer hitched. A patrol boat strapped down tight. Another truck followed, then another, until a full convoy of 6 vehicles lined my driveway. Officers in uniform hopped out, some heading straight for the ramp, others unloading gear. Karen took 2 stunned steps forward. "Excuse me, what is going on here?" I leaned back in my chair. "Oh, just a little agreement I made. State police are using my ramp today for their patrol." Her mouth opened, closed, then opened again. "They can't. This is HOA property." An officer stepped forward, pulling a folded paper from his vest. "Ma'am, we have signed consent from the property owner and county authorization for operational use. You'll need to step aside." Her voice pitched higher. "You don't understand. This ramp is closed for safety. State jurisdiction supersedes HOA regulations." The officer said evenly, "If you interfere, you'll be obstructing a law enforcement operation." Karen froze, her clipboard trembling in her hands. Behind her, I saw neighbors gathering along the edge of the road, phones out, recording. I took another sip of coffee and smiled to myself. The trap was set. The strike was landing exactly as planned. The look on Karen's face when the state police convoy rolled down my drive was worth 20 years of HOA dues. Her jaw dropped, and for once, she didn't have a rehearsed line ready. The clipboard in her hand sagged until it bumped her knee. Neighbors began gathering like moths to a porch light. drawn by the rumble of engines and the flashing blue strobes on the patrol trucks. Phones were out instantly, half the community live streaming before the first boat even hit the water. "Officers," Karen began, her voice tight but pitched to Carrie. "You've been misinformed. This ramp is under HOA closure. Pending safety review. You can't launch here." The sergeant in charge didn't even blink. He was a tall man, broad shoulders, mirrored sunglasses reflecting her furious expression back at her. "Ma'am, this ramp is in active use under state authority. The owner has signed over operational consent. You'll need to clear the area." Karen's cheeks flushed crimson. "No, you don't understand. I'm the HOA president. This ramp is non-compliant, dangerous." And the sergeant held up the folder. "Ma'am, the county permits predate your HOA charter. They're legally binding and grandfathered. Any attempt to block access constitutes interference with state law enforcement." The neighbors murmured. I could hear Bill chuckling quietly behind his phone camera. Karen's voice climbed an octave. "You can't just override HOA rules. We are a governing body, not over state jurisdiction." "You're not," the sergeant said. He nodded toward two officers. "Clear the cones." The officers walked down, unclipped the plastic chain, and stacked the orange cones neatly off to the side. The sign Karen had zip-tied fluttered once before being dropped into a bin bag. Just like that, weeks of her petty tyranny were dismantled in under 60 seconds. Karen lunged forward, pointing a trembling finger at me. This is your doing. You've undermined the entire community." I leaned back in my chair, coffee mug in hand, and said loud enough for the crowd to hear, "No, Karen, I just reminded the community who actually owns this ramp." The laughter that rippled through the neighbors was low but sharp, like dry tinder catching flame. Desperate now, she turned back to the officers. "This is harassment. This man has been a problem for years. He violates rules. He disrespects authority. He's a threat to neighborhood harmony." The sergeant calmly slipped his sunglasses down his nose, looked her dead in the eye, and said, "Ma'am, the only threat I see right now is you interfering with a police operation. If you don't move back immediately, I'll have to cite you. And, trust me, you don't want that on your record." Her mouth opened, closed, then opened again, but no words came. She stepped back, muttering something about lawyers and appeals. Meanwhile, the officers were efficient. Within minutes, 2 patrol boats slid down my ramp into the water with a satisfying splash. Uniformed men and women loaded gear, radios crackled, and the cove buzzed with organized energy. My ramp, my property, was now the official hub of a state patrol sweep. The contrast couldn't have been sharper. Karen, sputtering on the shore, clipboard clutched like a shield, and the state police conducting business as if she didn't exist. By 9:30, the first boat was already cruising out across the lake, its lights flashing in the morning sun. Kids on paddleboards cheered. Fishermen tipped their hats. Even the usually reserved Martins clapped as the second boat powered away. And the phones, they were everywhere. Neighbors had filmed Karen's tantrum from every angle. I caught snippets. HOA, Karen tries to stop the cops, fails. Lake showdown, HOA versus state police. Karen loses it on the ramp. You could almost hear the internet sharpening its knives. Karen must have realized it too. She tried to collect herself, straightening her blouse, smoothing her hair, forcing her lips into a brittle smile. "This isn't over," she hissed at me as she passed, heels stabbing the gravel like tiny daggers. "Oh, it's over," I said quietly. "You just don't know it yet." As she drove off, neighbors drifted over, clapping me on the shoulder, offering grins and congratulations. Bill raised his phone triumphantly. "Got the whole thing. She's going viral tonight." Patty laughed, casserole dish in hand again, as if summoned by fate. "Jack, you don't just win, you put on a show." I shrugged, sipping the last of my coffee. All I did was set the stage. Karen wrote her own lines. By late morning, the ramp was humming like a beehive. Officers came and went, radios chirping, boats idling, engines revving. The lake hadn't seen this much action in years. And through it all, I sat on my porch, watching the spectacle unfold with the quiet satisfaction of a man who'd finally turned the tide. Karen thought she could bury me under paperwork, cones, and intimidation. Instead, she buried herself in front of half the neighborhood and a half-dozen smartphone cameras. And the best part, I hadn't raised my voice once. As the sun climbed high, I felt the weight of weeks of frustration lifting. Karen's grip on the neighborhood wasn't broken, it was shattered, and everyone had seen it happen with their own eyes. For the first time in a long time, the lake felt like mine again. But the aftermath, that was still to come. The lake had a strange calm the next morning. Not the natural calm I loved, the mist on the water, the sound of loons calling, but a social calm, like the whole neighborhood was catching its breath after watching a storm pass. Karen's SUV never left her driveway. Her curtains stayed closed tight, and the once loud voice that used to carry across the cove at every sunrise was silent. It was almost eerie. For weeks, she had been the center of everyone's attention, strutting around with her clipboard and laminated signs. Now, she was a ghost in her own kingdom. The HOA board, for their part, fell quiet too. No more letters appeared in my mailbox. No surprise inspection notices. No strangers with clipboards. It was as if the entire organization had gone into hiding, waiting to see what the fallout would be. I suspect their lawyers had told them exactly what I already knew, that going up against state authority and recorded county permits was a battle they couldn't win. By midweek, the shift in the neighborhood was obvious. Folks who hadn't spoken to me in months were suddenly friendlier. They waved again. Some even stopped by for small talk. Bill came over with a case of beer and set it down with a grin. "You realize you're a legend now, right?" he said. I laughed. Legend's a strong word. No, he insisted. "You went toe-to-toe with Karen and won. And not just won, you embarrassed her so bad the whole lake saw it. People needed to know she could bleed." Patty echoed the sentiment when she brought over another casserole. "You gave us all a little breathing room," she said. "For once, she's not out there barking orders. It feels peaceful again." It was true. Life settled back into the rhythm I'd almost forgotten I loved. Early mornings on the water, the quiet creak of the dock under my boots, the easy laughter of neighbors who no longer looked over their shoulders before speaking. And yet, I couldn't shake the thought that this wasn't just about my ramp, or even Karen. It was about the principle of ownership, of standing your ground when someone tries to bully you into submission. Karen thought she could control the lake by controlling the rules. She thought she could wear people down with letters, fines, inspections, and gossip. And for a while, it worked. Folks were scared of her. Some still are. But what she never understood is that authority isn't about how loud you shout or how many papers you wave around. Real authority comes from truth, from law, from the quiet confidence of knowing you're in the right. I didn't win by yelling louder. I didn't win by fighting fire with fire. I won by being patient, by documenting, by finding the crack in her armor and prying it open with calm, steady pressure. And when the moment came, I let her defeat herself in front of everyone. A week later, I heard that video Bill recorded had made the rounds online. Titles like HOA Karen versus State Police and Karen Gets Owned at the Lake had popped up across social media. Some folks said it had gone viral in a Facebook group dedicated to HOA horror stories. Part of me worried Karen might double down out of spite, try to claw back her reputation by coming after me again. But when I finally saw her in town, she barely made eye contact. She ducked into her SUV and drove off without a word. For someone who'd once thrived on confrontation, that silence was louder than any argument. The HOA still exists, technically, but their bite has dulled. Meetings are quieter. Rules are enforced with more caution. It's as though my ramp had become a cautionary tale for them, a reminder that power has limits and that some battles aren't worth fighting. For me, life has gone back to the way I always wanted it. Peaceful mornings, quiet evenings, the freedom to use my ramp without worrying about cones, chains, or laminated signs. Sometimes, when I sit on the dock at sunset, I still see the image of those patrol boats launching, the look on Karen's face as the authority she worshipped crumbled in her hands. And it reminds me of something I think we all need to remember. Bullies only win if you let them. They thrive on fear, on silence, on people giving in to keep the peace. But when you stand up calm, steady, with the truth on your side, they fall apart. Maybe not immediately, but inevitably. So if you're out there dealing with your own Karen, whether it's an HOA president, a pushy boss, or just someone who thinks they can walk over you, don't give up. Don't let them convince you that their power is bigger than it is. Be patient. Document everything. Know your rights. And when the time comes, don't be afraid to let them trip over their own arrogance. Because at the end of the day, people like Karen don't lose because you shout louder. They lose because you refuse to play their game. What this whole ordeal taught me is simple peace is worth protecting. But it doesn't come from giving in to bullies. It comes from standing up in the right way, at the right time, with the right tools. The lake is peaceful again, not because I fought harder, but because I fought smarter. So, to anyone watching this, I'll say this: don't let anyone convince you that you're powerless on your own property, in your own life, or in your own story. You've got more strength than you think, and sometimes the quietest moves make the loudest impact. Now, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever dealt with an HOA horror story or a Karen who tried to push you around? Share your experience in the comments. I read every single one. And if you're new here, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next story. Trust me, you won't want to.